Well, good afternoon, Frank.
Good afternoon, Professor.
Another active week and all sorts of interesting things happening in different parts of the world. And I've been trying to understand the larger process in which all this is happening. And I found myself in groups of people who have been talking about things that I hadn't really been introduced to before, but it has to do with how we should understand reality, and that reality isn't really what we think it is.
I take it that these were not philosophers.
They were philosophers.
Oh, they were.
All right. And but maybe not the sort of philosopher that you're used to. Daniel Dennett is one of them. You may have heard his name. A man called Hoffman in California. Anyway, a number of these people and other people that I talk to locally. And it occurred to me that so much of the way our world is organized has been changing as the idea of globalization has gradually taken hold over the last half century. And I think we've said before that as we look back, we see globalization progressing and getting more and more significant since the middle of the last century, but we didn't start really talking about it a lot until the 1990s, when we suddenly found that our world was no longer bipolar, divided between the American camp and the Soviet camp. But it's interesting that we started talking about the need for interdisciplinary research and teaching in the late 1960s. And we may have said this before, that the main academic response to it was that everybody wanted to build stronger defenses around their disciplines to stop other people interfering with what they did. And it wasn't until the late 1990s that real interdisciplinary studies first began, and I was certainly part of that when it really did begin, and I think it's extremely important. And I find now that teaching interdisciplinary courses, I get a much bigger demand for what I'm teaching than if I were teaching the traditional discipline-focused courses. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got well over 100 students in the two main interdisciplinary courses I teach, and the numbers keep increasing. Obviously that means that since academia as we know it started to develop, and the sciences as we know them began to develop starting in the 17th century, right. We've gradually divided knowledge into more and more distinct disciplines and assumed that in order to understand the world, you have to see it through a methodology and an academic tradition that deals with a specific part of it. And there's been less and less actual collaboration between people in different disciplines, looking at the world from different points of view. But that now is changing. And I think that all the other things that have divided different parts of our lives are undergoing the same experience. For instance, the 19th century was a time, well, between the early 19th century and the middle of the 20th century was a time when we divided the world up into more and more distinct nation states. And certainly in the second half of the 20th century, everybody accepted the fact that the world was a combination of nation states, and you had to be a nation state in order to be a member of the United Nations and belong to the club. And now now we talk about failed states, which is a totally new idea. And nation states are failing to control their borders, and there's more and more questioning about your right to cross borders. So it's interesting that quantum theory was a completely new way of understanding physics, which very few people understand anything about. if they haven't actually studied it. But well, Einstein, who was the hero of physics to begin with, had big problems with quantum theory, and kept on trying to trap the people who were working on it to show that they were mistaken. And they found ways of disproving him. But very little notice has been taken of quantum theory until very recently, and now there's more and more attention being being given to it. And what's interesting about it is that ever since the ancient Greek philosophers, since before the classical period, we have seen the world in terms of atoms.
Mm-hmm.
The minuscule bits of matter which can't be divided, which is what the word atom means in Greek. And that's never been questioned until quantum theory. And even though people starting at the very end of the 19th century began to question it and work out and see things that showed that the atom could be, we had to understand what was going on inside the atom in order to understand what was going on outside it. People have resisted that idea in the same way that Einstein did. But now, just in the last few years, gradually people are taking more and more notice of it and trying to understand it, and suggesting that if we understood quantum theory properly, then everything else would look different.
Yes.
Because we would be understanding everything as a product of a different type. So, I mean, what I like to see, and what I think globalization is going to show us, is that human life is going to be very different in a community of 10 billion people from what it was in the community that I grew up in, which was a few million, if you could count the community, the whole of the population of one country as one community, and I'm not sure that you can. In fact, the community of people interacting with each other that I grew up in was maybe 100,
mm-hmm.
probably not more than that. So it's grown at an incredible rate since the middle of the last century, and I think that has changed what it means to me to be a human being, the quality of life. And I think it's going to change much more than that in the next 50 years, and that this is showing us basically how to understand the way it's changing. I'm sorry, that was a long introduction to a
No, I think it was. I think
discussion.
It might be apt, and I'm going to ask you to talk a minute or two further, if you don't mind. Could you, just so we're both on the same page, tell me a little bit about your understanding of quantum theory in terms of what you're thinking of for globalization? Just give me a little bit of, I fully knowing that you're an anthropologist, not a physicist, but just a little bit of background on it.
Well, that instead of the world being made up of atoms and waves and different types of things like that, in fact, light is made up of photons. Energy is made up of particles in the same way. Everything, including everything in the atom, which includes a force that holds everything together in each atom, is made up of other particles.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at a reality in which everything is made up of different types of particle, which are much smaller than anything we had in mind before, and makes the relationship of everything to everything else much more, what shall I say, much more complex, but also much more the only word I can think of at the moment is holistic.
Mm-hmm.
That is much more closely interrelated
Mm-hmm.
scientifically. And
Well,
we're gradually beginning to understand the way the world works in a completely different way from the way we were understanding it before.
mm-hmm. Well,
At the same time as the number of people in the world is increasing from what was just 1 million in 10,000 years ago to 10 billion soon,
mm-hmm.
and the 1 million were divided up into a large number of very small communities, and the 10 billion will all be one community. I see a correlation.
Yeah, I'm peripherally aware of quantum theory. I read I responsibly read news articles about it because I'm interested in it. I'm always intrigued by Einstein's general atomic theory. And I scratched my head for the first 40 years of my life wondering how this was still a theory. Hadn't it, after all, been proven somehow or somewhere? And periodically there are yet new stories in science sections of journals about how a new discovery has led to further validation or further proof of Einstein's theory. And there is this subgroup of quantum theorists out there decomposing the atom even further, searching for the Higgs particle, searching for there's all sorts of things they're working on that huge cyclotron underneath France and Switzerland, trying to smash atoms to look for even the smallest irreducible parts as a way to go back to see how the universe was initially formed. But, and here's my but, aside from perhaps looking at the effects of globalization and subdividing the human social tendencies from what it might have been when you were growing up, when you had relationships with, let's say, 100 people, to perhaps having relationships with 1,000 people now, and then your grandchildren perhaps having relationships with 10,000 people, and their grandchildren having relationships with 100,000 people. Aside from that, I'm not sure where your analysis is coming in to the globalization question. I'm missing something.
Well, so many other things are changing as the size of the human community changes.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the way we think about the relationship between our species and other species is beginning to be very different now from what it was 50 years ago, or even more recently than that. So you go to YouTube and it's full of videos of cat behavior showing how intelligent they are.
Right.
And it's not only cat behavior. I mean, the cat videos are particularly amusing. But there's videos of gorillas and chimpanzees and all sorts of other species as well. So, I mean, we're thinking of our position in relation to everything else in new ways.
Are either Dennis or Hoffman extrapolating quantum theory into ways to look at human interactions in a different way?
I haven't read everything they've written by any means, and I haven't come across anything like that in what they're writing. But then, another thing that I keep coming back to is that the social dimension of human experience is probably the most neglected. Everybody pays a lot of attention to culture, but nobody pays any attention, even among social anthropologists, to the way social life is changing in the modern world as a result of the expansion of the arenas within which we interact with others. And I think that is, in fact, the essence of the quality of human life.
I completely concur with that, because in my opinion, that social interaction is the fabric that provides the backdrop upon which history rests. I mean,
history is a product of social interaction.
Yeah, exactly. You can read as many history books as you like about specific events, but until you can understand what the social interaction levels were and what the societies were thinking and what people were speaking about and interacting and discussing, it doesn't keep it in perspective at all. You don't really have a full understanding of it. This is very interesting. It's very interesting. What are your plans with this? Are you going to learn more about quantum theory?
I think I have to. I've started reading more about it, and I want to look more into what Dennett and Hoffman have been writing. So we may have more to say about this next week.
May I briefly circle back when you were talking about the interdisciplinary nature? So the first thing that came to mind is if you go to the University of Pennsylvania website, and one of those tabs will produce a drop-down box of probably 80 different departments of specialties of knowledge there. It would possibly be interesting to contact the physics department and go over and have a cup of coffee with them.
Yes, well, I'm trying to find somebody that I think would be interested in talking to a social scientist.
You might be surprised.
Yeah.
You might be surprised.
No, I'm trying to find interdisciplinary contacts like that to see what we can do.
Well, if you find that person, and if you don't mind me tagging along, I'll be happy to come down for that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. We'll talk next week, Brian. All right.
Okay. Bye for now.
All right. Bye.